Chapter 26, A Little Grain of Hope. My eyes stung as I made the journey to my home across town, visiting each room of my mind. The living room, where Punky's crayon wrappers and my wood shavings lay like litter in a hamster cage. The kitchen, where Mom fried chinny while Dad checked the newspaper for antique auctions. The bathroom, with Dad's shaving kit and Mom's hairbrush together by the sink. Their bedroom, with the God's eye hanging from a knob on the highboy. Punky's bedroom, with clowns from wall to wall. My room, with the sea green carpet. The room that was Heidi Grissom's now. A little ways from the house, I stopped and blew my nose. Down the street, I caught sight of Marcus Gregory playing cars in the gravel of his driveway. If I focused on him, I wouldn't see beyond the shrubs, wouldn't see my house as a whole. With my eyes riveted on his spiky blonde hair, I moved on, remembering how he and Punky had played circus with clowns and animals in the dirt under the swing set. Marcus had been 7 then, Punky 35. Del Rita? Marcus said, jumping up when he saw me. He'd grown taller, but the 2 cowlicks on his forehead still gave him a devilish look. Hi, Marcus, I said without slowing down. If I stopped to talk to him, I might never have the courage to pass those shrubs. I could feel his eyes on me as I turned onto what used to be my sidewalk. My gaze never left the concrete. As I neared the porch, a smothering sensation enveloped me. I gulped air, trying to suck in enough oxygen to get me up the steps. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. I stared at the door, at that nickel-sized hole made when Dad's lawnmower flung a rock. My legs wobbled. I was bonkers for doing this. I should turn around and leave right now, but I lifted a hand and knocked on the spot beside the hole. Maybe no one was home. Footsteps. Maybe the person would think I was nuts and slam the door in my face. The knob was turning. Run! Too late. The door swung open and a lady with chestnut hair and a wrinkled face peered at me over silver-rimmed spectacles. Hello, she said. I knew her from somewhere. Those wrinkles like a Shar-Pei. I remembered then. I'd seen her reading poetry to Madeline Zhang at the nursing home. I'm Dorita Jensen, I stammered, and I'm, looking for Heidi? She finished shaking her head. She's not here. Can I help you with something? I'm her grandmother, Abigail Naramore. Well, actually, I'm not looking for Heidi. I used to live here. Oh, that's why your name rang a bell. Or maybe I heard it from a Heidi. Doesn't matter. So tell me, if you didn't come to see Heidi, what brings you here? I stumbled through an explanation that sounded crazy even to me, but Mrs. Naramore must have thought I was harmless. She took my hand, drew me inside, and shut the door. Goodness, hon, you're shaking like a leaf. I stared at my feet. It'll be all right. It's just it was hard for me to come here. I can imagine. Please sit down. I dropped into the nearest seat, an unpadded wooden bench. Whomp! My tailbone got rammed clear up to my ribs. When I recovered, I sat blinking at my surroundings. Scarred wooden desks, another old bench, wallpaper with ABCs and numbers. Obviously, the decor was old-time schoolhouse, but it was the ugliest living room I'd ever seen. A bubble of hysteria rose in my throat. To disguise my snort of laughter, I ducked my head and pinched my nose. You poor child, Mrs. Naramore said. Can I get you anything? A drink of water, maybe? No, thanks, I snickered. I'll be okay in a minute. I heard about that young man on the radio this morning, Mrs. Naramore said. So he wandered away looking for his bear? Do you really think your mother's bear could be in our attic? I only nodded because I still felt the urge to giggle my head off. Then let's have a look. I followed her, aware now that her pedal pushers and short-sleeved shirt revealed age spots on her skinny limbs. Ugh! Someone had painted the kitchen cabinets yellow and stenciled fruit on the doors. The curtains were yellow and white checkered, and so was the oilcloth on the table. Mrs. Naramore fished a flashlight from a drawer, handed it to me, and headed for the door to the garage. We're not very organized yet for the move, she said, so you'll have to excuse the mess out there. So many cartons, there's hardly room for my car. I've been after Walter to store them in the attic, but he's been too busy learning about the antique shop. There's a stepladder. Since I'm not as spry as I used to be, you'll have to do the climbing. The garage looked like a warehouse, not at all like Dad's workshop, and the air smelled of musty cardboard and engine oil, not freshly sawn lumber. After positioning the ladder under the attic entry, I climbed up and hauled myself through the hole. I played the flashlight in a circle around me. Dust, cobwebs, boxes, a spittoon, my toy chest, and Mom's old rocking chair. A knot of sadness formed in my throat when I saw her handwriting on some of the boxes. Christmas decorations and stuff from the farm. Gingerly, I peeled back the flaps on the first farm box. Baby clothes, probably mine. I held up a pink jumpsuit and grinned. Even then I'd had pipe cleaner legs. The knot in my throat eased. I sneezed twice and plowed into more boxes. Income tax papers, account records of soybeans and corn, workbooks I'd had in elementary school, miscellaneous shoes and work boots. In the fifth box, packed in with tablecloths and curtains, I found what I was looking for. Bruno Bear. Pater, I said, tossing the bear to Mrs. Nairmore before climbing down the ladder. At the bottom, I sneezed again. Come in and wash the dust off, she said. I'll fix you something to drink. I've been too much trouble already. No trouble at all. Just make yourself at home while I get your drink. Make myself at home. I rinsed off with the kitchen sink and dried on a paper towel, being careful not to glance out the window into the backyard where Punky's swing set had stood. Mrs. Nairmore handed me a glass of orange juice and pointed to the table. Pull up a chair, hun. I sat down, clutching Bruno on my lap. He smelled like the farmhouse, like wood smoke. I thought of Dad at the farm, coming in the back door after feeding livestock, stamping snow off his boots and warming his hands over the big black stove in the kitchen. I thought of saying, home is where your loved ones are. It's where you hang your heart. Suddenly, in this awful yellow kitchen, I felt a blessed release. This house was just a house now. It was home to the Nairmores and Heidi and had nothing to do with me. I don't know what else you found in the attic, but if you want it, it's yours, Mrs. Nairmore said as she joined me at the table. Walter can bring it to you one of these days. Thanks. Thanks. I stared at the checks on the tablecloth. Her kindness made me feel like pond scum for the way I treated Heidi. Are you in the 8th grade too? I nodded. She chuckled and gathered some crumbs into a pile with her finger. Then I'll bet you've been talking to a combat veteran. Heidi's interviewing a prisoner of war. So that's where she is, I said, trying to pick up my end of the conversation. No. At the moment, she's visiting her mother. She's back from Europe? Mrs. Nairmore's head shot up. Europe? Madeline's never been to Europe. I felt my eyebrows scrunched together. How could you shoot photographs in Europe if you didn't go there first? Mrs. Nairmore started crying, and I added 2 and 2. Heidi had made up the story about her mother. But why? Not a sound was coming from Mrs. Nairmore, but her whole body was shaking and tears were sliding down her cheeks. I looked at Bruno, at the checkered curtains, at the fruit stencils on the cupboard doors. Anything to keep from seeing her carry on like this. After getting up to fetch a paper towel for her, I shifted from one foot to the other, wondering what to do. Should I leave? Should I stay? Should I call the antique shop and tell Walter? Come home quick, your wife's having a nervous breakdown. At last, her tears stopped rolling. She shuddered and mopped her face. I'm sorry, hon. That's been coming on for a long time, but it's too bad you had to see it. If you'd care to sit down, I'll try to explain. I sat down again with Bruno in my lap. It seemed a small miracle he was still intact. I'd been squeezing him hard enough to pop his stuffing out. Heidi's mother is in the nursing home, Mrs. Nairmore said, in a vegetative state. I felt as though a balloon had inflated in my chest. In a flash of memory, I heard Mrs. Nairmore reading poetry. I saw Heidi, pale as dough, carrying a treasury of nursery rhymes. Madeline Zhang was Heidi's mother. Until this moment, I'd missed the connection, because when Mrs. Nairmore answered the door, I was all upset about the house. Madeline was a photographer, and traveling Europe with her camera was her dream, Mrs. Nairmore said, lacing and unlacing her fingers. I had no idea Heidi was telling that story, and that's why it came as a shock. She wiped a hand across her mouth before going on. I'll spare you the details. Suffice it to say that Madeline was an alcoholic and the victim of a terrible accident. That person in the nursing home was not my daughter, nor Heidi's mother, but a shell, an empty shell. I didn't know what to say. Anything I came up with would be woefully inadequate, like the endless phrases uttered to me after my parents died. Technically, Madeline Zhang was alive. Machines were pumping air in and out of her body, but the love and the laughter were gone. And yet, the family had seized onto a little grain of hope. Mrs. Nairmore read poetry to Madeline in hopes she'd make that long journey back. Heidi was probably reading nursery rhymes to her this very minute. Mrs. Nairmore, I said, touching her hand, that Europe story, maybe Heidi tells it to keep her mother's dreams alive.